It began, as most things in Trump's second presidency do, with a tweet. Starting Monday, the U.S. will impose strategic tariffs on nations that have been exploiting us for decades. Time to play hardball. #AmericaFirst again. Just 280 characters, but enough to set off a geopolitical earthquake. It was early March 2025. The global economy, still wobbling from post-pandemic restructuring and energy crises, had barely regained its footing. But Donald J. Trump, re-elected in a stunning upset just months prior, wasn't interested in waiting for the dust to settle. He was back. And he wanted everyone to know it. This time, the battlefield wasn't just China. The new tariff list included Germany, South Korea, Mexico, Canada, and even the United Kingdom, America's closest traditional ally. The justification: currency manipulation, unfair subsidies, environmental cheating, and disrespect for the American worker. The numbers were staggering: a 25% tax on automotive imports from Europe, a 15% agricultural surcharge on South American soy, and perhaps most controversially, a 10% universal adjustment tariff on all goods coming from countries with a trade surplus against the U.S. The move was classic Trump, disruptive, defiant, and deeply polarizing. While core supporters hailed it as a long overdue reckoning, an economic declaration of independence, economists began issuing quiet warnings. Wall Street held its breath. And the international community? Outrage. Within hours, German Chancellor Mahler accused the U.S. of weaponizing its consumer base. China's Ministry of Commerce issued a terse, unmistakable statement: any attempt to corner the dragon will invite fire. But if the world was shocked, Trump's inner circle wasn't. They'd seen it coming. Behind the scenes, the plan had been brewing for weeks. Trump, emboldened by what he saw as a mandate to finish what he started, had pushed his economic advisory team to draw up a list of targets. But not all his aides agreed with the strategy. Janet Myers, the newly appointed Treasury Secretary and a moderate fiscal hawk, reportedly voiced serious concerns during a February closed-door meeting. This could trigger a capital flight, she warned. We risk undermining our own currency stability. Trump's response: let the dollar dip a little. Makes exports cheaper. We win either way. To Trump, trade was war. A constant zero-sum game of winners and losers. And he was determined to win, whether the world liked it or not. Yet, even his staunchest allies felt the pressure. Greg Halston, the hawkish trade policy director known for his fiery TV appearances, was oddly quiet in the days following the announcement. Insiders suggested he had advised against going after Canada, fearing blowback from key Midwestern voters reliant on North American supply chains. But his voice was drowned out in the larger narrative of dominance. While the world's attention was fixated on Trump's bold new tariff policy, something more subtle, but arguably more dangerous, was unraveling inside the West Wing. The public saw a united front. Trump standing tall behind the podium, flanked by cabinet members nodding dutifully. We are reclaiming control of our economy, he declared. No more being laughed at by Europe, no more letting China outsmart us. The applause was loud. The optics: impeccable. But behind the smiles and the camera flashes, the foundations of trust within Trump's senior team were beginning to crack. It began with a memo. Leaked to the Washington Post, the internal White House document outlined a list of objections from several top officials, including National Security Advisor Claire Douglas and Treasury Secretary Janet Myers. In it, they questioned not only the timing of the tariffs but their sweeping nature. The memo warned of retaliatory measures, currency destabilization, and potential fractures within key military alliances. It wasn't signed, deliberately so, but the tone was unmistakable: restrained panic from inside the halls of power. Trump was furious. Disloyal cowards, he fumed during a late-night meeting, according to sources present. They're not advising. They're undermining. His inner circle grew tighter overnight. Phone logs were reviewed. Staffers grilled. A shadow of paranoia began creeping into daily operations at the White House. The president, long known for his gut instincts and distrust of bureaucratic procedure, began relying more on his personal advisors, family members, longtime loyalists, and political outsiders who shared his unshakable vision of America's resurgence through economic dominance. And yet, even within that trusted circle, dissent quietly simmered. In the days that followed, several senior aides reportedly submitted letters of concern, not resignations, but warnings. They knew that leaving outright would make headlines. But staying silent felt like complicity. In one tense cabinet meeting, captured in anonymous notes later leaked to Axios, the discussion turned bitter. "With all due respect, Mr. President," began Energy Secretary Mason Green, "Canada is our second-largest trading partner. The agricultural tariffs will hit our own farmers first." Trump's response was swift. "Farmers love me. They know I fight for them. We'll subsidize if we need to." It's called strategy. But it wasn't just policy disputes. It was about process, about power. Multiple reports indicated that Trump had overridden standard economic briefings, cut out interagency reviews, and implemented the tariffs using an obscure executive order clause meant for emergency conditions. It blindsided the bureaucracy. Even the Pentagon was caught off guard, uncertain if the moves would destabilize NATO cohesion. Meanwhile, in the Eisenhower Executive Office building, where much of the behind-the-scenes operations occur, mid-level staff began murmuring of the shift, an internal term whispered over coffee and behind closed doors, referring to a fundamental change in how the administration was run. Decisions, they said, were no longer being debated. They were being delivered. And that shift was creating cracks, not just ideological ones, but personal. Longtime allies were drifting apart. Conversations between departments slowed. Requests for meetings were delayed or outright ignored. The interoffice Slack channels grew oddly quiet. There were moments of confrontation too, small but telling. In one incident described by an anonymous staffer, Trump lashed out at his trade advisor Greg Halston in the Oval Office, accusing him of leaking like a French pipe. Halston, once known for his fiery on-air defenses of the president, reportedly walked out, slamming the door behind him. Later that week, Halston appeared on Fox Business with noticeably more reserved language, calling the tariff strategy evolving and in need of review. For Trump, such hesitation was close to betrayal. And then came the press conference. In a moment that would later be dissected frame by analysts and armchair psychologists alike, Trump stood at the East Room podium to reinforce his administration's stance. But when asked by a reporter whether all his cabinet supported the policy, he paused, just a second too long. "We have most of the team on board," he said. "And those who aren't, they'll either get on board or get out of the way." The cameras captured the flicker in his eyes, the tension in his jaw. This wasn't a confident boast, it was a warning. A declaration of war within his own walls. By the week's end, 2 deputy advisors had quietly resigned. No press releases. No tweets. Just locked desks and quiet goodbyes. The internal fractures were no longer whispers. They were becoming fault lines. And the White House, despite its marble walls and manicured facade, was beginning to shake. Loyalty has always been Donald Trump's ultimate currency. Not policy expertise. Not political experience. But loyalty, unflinching, unwavering, and unquestioned. In his world, you're either in or you're out. And in the spring of 2025, that line was being redrawn more sharply than ever before. As the tariff crisis deepened, so too did the divide inside Trump's cabinet. What had once been internal tension had now become an open test of allegiance. And the battleground was no longer foreign trade, it was the Situation Room. It started with a meeting that wasn't supposed to be historic, but became one. On a rainy Monday afternoon, top members of the cabinet were summoned to what aides dubbed a consensus session at the White House. It was meant to unify the team. Instead, it nearly split it apart. Insiders later revealed the session was marked by awkward silences, subtle defiance, and outright confrontation. Trump, seated at the head of the Oval Table, opened the floor with a direct challenge. "You're either backing the tariffs, or you're backing China. There's no in-between." The room went still. Secretary of State Leanne Torres was the first to speak. Calm, measured, and visibly tense. "Mr. President, I support fair trade. But isolating our allies weakens our hand with Beijing. Germany, the UK, they're not our enemies." Trump cut her off with a wave. "They're not allies if they don't pay up. We've been the world's ATM. Not anymore." Then came Defense Secretary Calvin Reeves, usually one of Trump's most loyal cabinet picks. Sir, the tariffs have already sparked a NATO emergency session. This isn't just about trade, it's about trust. We're risking decades of alliance structure. The president stared at him. If NATO falls apart because we asked them to stop screwing us, then maybe it wasn't worth much to begin with. The discussion spiraled. Janet Myers from Treasury warned about a potential run on U.S. bonds. Commerce Secretary Brent Wallace pushed back, insisting the long-term play would be worth the short-term hit. Markets always cry before they clap, he smirked. Trump chuckled. A rare moment of levity, but only for a moment. Because then came the question that hung over the room like smoke. Who's really with me? Not metaphorically. Not rhetorically. Trump reportedly went chair to chair, eye to eye, asking for direct, verbal affirmations of support. It wasn't a meeting anymore. It was a loyalty audit. Leanne Torres hesitated. Reeves gave a carefully worded response, I serve the commander-in-chief. Myers avoided eye contact altogether. Only a handful responded with full-throated pledges. Greg Halston, whatever you need, Mr. President. Brent Wallace, let's go full throttle. And, surprisingly, Jared Kushner, returning quietly as a senior advisor in Trump's second term, added, they'll follow if you lead hard enough. The moment was surreal, said one staffer. Like a corporate cult meeting. Like Caesar testing his senators. But there were consequences. Immediate ones. Within 72 hours, Torres submitted a formal request for reassignment. It was denied, but her media briefings were suspended. Reeves' upcoming military summit in Brussels was quietly cancelled. Myers. She was, on personal leave, by the end of the week, replaced, temporarily, they claimed, by an acting deputy known for his hardline economic nationalism. The message was clear, you speak out, you sit out. And then came the leaks, because in Washington, silence is never total. Unnamed officials began feeding outlets like Politico and The Atlantic with stories of what really happened in the showdown meeting. And for the first time, the phrase, fractured cabinet, made its way into headlines. Fox News tried to spin it as robust internal debate. CNN called it a civil war under gold ceilings. And late-night hosts. They had a field day. This administration isn't draining the swamp, it's turning on each other like reality TV stars who missed their Xanax. Jimmy Fallon. But beneath the jokes, the instability was real. International diplomats began recalibrating their strategies. Ambassadors from Germany and South Korea requested urgent clarification on America's long-term trade policy. Japan delayed a multi-billion-dollar joint investment until Washington's direction becomes more stable. Even domestically, Republican governors began tiptoeing around Trump's agenda. Florida's governor issued a vague statement about local economies needing flexibility. Texas, typically a Trump stronghold, warned of agricultural backlash if Mexico retaliated with border crop bans. Still, Trump doubled down. At a rally in Ohio, always a symbolic stronghold, he told a roaring crowd. Let them talk. Let the so-called experts cry. We're bringing jobs home. We're building strength. And if someone in my cabinet can't handle that, they know where the door is. It was vintage Trump. And his base loved it. But inside the West Wing, more and more doors were closing. Not slammed, but quietly, permanently. Schedules changed. Access lists were tightened. Whispered conversations replaced open planning. What was once a government, was now a proving ground. And as the president rallied outside the gates, the question that remained inside was no longer, what do we do, but simply, who's next? If there's one thing Wall Street hates more than regulation, it's confusion. And in the aftermath of Trump's 2025 tariff parade, confusion wasn't just present. It had moved in, redecorated the lobby, and was charging consulting fees. On Monday, Trump announced his bold new tariffs. On Tuesday, the Dow did what it always does when someone says tariff in a loud voice, it panicked. By Wednesday, the dollar was sliding faster than truth at a campaign rally. The irony. Trump's entire pitch was built on strengthening America's economy. But currency traders don't care about slogans, they care about signals. And the signal here was blinking red. Investors scrambled for safe havens. Gold spiked. The euro flexed. Even Bitcoin, yes, that rebellious digital teenager of finance, got a smirk and a nod from hedge funds looking for anywhere that wasn't made in America. One Wall Street analyst was quoted saying, "The market is trying to price in irrationality, which is, by nature, unpriceable." Translation: nobody had any idea what was happening, but they knew it smelled like trouble with a spray tan. The Treasury Department, well, what was left of it after Secretary Meyer's mysterious leave of absence, tried to calm the storm. A press release stated, "The administration remains confident in long-term dollar stability." It might have sounded reassuring if it hadn't been released at 3 a.m., typed entirely in Comic Sans. Meanwhile, in the corporate world, CEOs began practicing their best, "We support the president, but," statements. Apple issued a note to shareholders warning of unexpected volatility in the North American market. Ford said it was reassessing production strategies after realizing the new tariffs meant it might cost more to ship a truck across Michigan than across the Pacific. Amazon. Jeff Bezos, somewhere in orbit, simply tweeted, "Interesting. Back on Earth, the small businesses, the very ones Trump vowed to protect, were seeing price sheets rewritten mid-order." One steel supplier in Ohio claimed they lost 3 clients in a week. "We support the administration," the owner told a local reporter, "but we also support staying in business." So, at the same time, whispers began spreading that some nations, particularly China, weren't just planning retaliation, they were already executing it. Quietly, strategically. First, they allowed the yuan to weaken slightly. Not enough to trigger alarm bells, but enough to undercut U.S. exports. Second, they delayed soybean orders. Again. Third, they smiled politely in front of cameras, while signing massive trade deals with Latin America, without inviting the U.S. Beijing even held a press conference where their finance minister said, in near-perfect English, "We do not wish for conflict. We simply adapt. If America builds a wall, we build a tunnel." Subtle. Elegant. Savage. Back home, Trump wasn't worried. Not outwardly. At a rally in Indiana, he proclaimed, "The dollar's down. That's great for exports. You know what else is down? My golf handicap." Coincidence? I don't think so. The crowd roared. Somewhere, an economist wept softly into a spreadsheet. But the real twist came not from a speech, or a tweet, or a press release. It came from Walmart. Yes, the beloved palace of cheap everything. Walmart, whose empire relies on stable pricing and international supply chains, quietly rolled out warnings to shareholders that costs may rise on consumer goods. Translation: that $19.99 microwave might soon cost $29.99, and if you complain, they'll just blame Beijing. And when Walmart starts blinking, Main Street takes notice. Polls began to shift. A Gallup survey showed that while 60% of Republicans still approved of Trump's tough trade stance, only 34% believed it was helping their wallet. And among independents, support for the tariff plan dropped faster than crypto during a celebrity lawsuit. Late-night comedians pounced. Stephen Colbert joked, "Trump wanted to punish China, but it looks like he accidentally punched America in the face while aiming." Trevor Noah quipped, "He's playing economic Jenga, with gloves on, and blindfolded." Even Fox News hosts began tiptoeing. One anchor said, "It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off." They cut to commercial immediately after. Behind the scenes, markets weren't just nervous, they were preparing escape plans. Several multinational corporations began exploring offshore dollar hedging, a fancy term for, "let's protect our money before things get weird." By the end of the month, the US dollar index had dropped to a 2-year low. Not catastrophic. Not apocalyptic. Just enough to feel fragile. Which was, perhaps, the most dangerous part of all. Because markets are creatures of belief. And the moment they start questioning not the data, but the decision makers, that's when belief begins to break. And once that breaks, well, good luck fixing it with tariffs. In Washington, perception is currency. And when real currency is crashing, perception becomes the only thing left holding up the walls. As Trump's tariff policy rippled through the economy, the media did what it does best: panic, spin, and punch the air like a caffeinated boxer with a conspiracy board. The result? A firestorm of takes, counter-takes, hot mics, and hotter tempers. Fox News rolled out with their greatest hits. Trump's tariffs, tough love for the world. Dollar drop. More like market adjustment. Trump fights for you, and by you, we mean you in Ohio. Tucker Carlson, resurrected on his own network after a brief spiritual retreat in Montana, said with glowing eyes. What Trump is doing is reminding the world, we're not your piggy bank. We're your landlord. Rent's due. Cut to CNN. Entirely different movie. Their cheerin' screamed. Internal collapse. WH staffers turn on each other. Dollar dips, markets slide, president golfs. Anderson Cooper furrowed his brow so deeply it nearly formed its own opinion column. We're witnessing a presidency at war with itself, and with economic gravity. MSNBC, never one to miss a metaphor, compared the White House to the Titanic. They hit the iceberg. Now they're arguing over who gets the lifeboats. Meanwhile, the New York Times dropped a Sunday cover story titled, "The Emperor's New Tariffs," with a sepia-toned photo of Trump standing alone in the Rose Garden, under the caption, "Is there a plan? Or just performance?" But it wasn't just mainstream media joining the circus. Twitter lit up with threads so long they could qualify as dissertations. Threads from former White House insiders, read, unpaid interns from 2019. TikTokers did dramatic lip syncs of Trump speeches, intercut with falling stock charts and crying dollar signs. One viral clip featured a parrot saying, "Tariff. Bad idea," on repeat. It got more retweets than most economists get in a lifetime. And YouTube? Oh, YouTube was thriving. Tariffs Explained with Lego, 4.3 million views. I tried living like the dollar for 24 hours, and it went downhill fast, 2.1 million views. Trump vs. His Own Cabinet The Remix, 1.8 million views with a dubstep drop every time someone quit. Even The Onion couldn't resist. Trump announces tariffs on reality itself. We're being taken advantage of by facts, says President. Back inside the West Wing, the communications team tried desperately to wrest back control of the narrative. Spoiler, they failed. Kayleigh McEnany's successor, a charismatic but wildly overwhelmed spokesperson named Dean Whitlock, began each press conference with a deep sigh and the phrase, "Let's remember folks, this is a strategy, not a symptom." He was later caught on a hot mic whispering to an aide, "I don't even know what we're spinning anymore." Leaks became the new language of government. Not official statements. Not memos. Leaks. Aides leaked that Trump was furious with Janet Myers for going rogue on CNBC. Others claimed Myers hadn't been on CNBC in weeks, and Trump had confused her with a woman in a Walgreens commercial. Another leak, Trump blamed the dollar's dip on negative vibes. When asked to clarify, an advisor said, he's recently been reading crystals. Then came the real bombshell. A senior official leaked excerpts from the loyalty audit meeting, the now infamous session where Trump demanded public pledges of support. Media outlets lost their collective minds. Headlines exploded. He said what? Trump demands fealty from staff, or else. It's not a cult, it's just a really aggressive book club. Suddenly, the story wasn't about tariffs. It wasn't even about the dollar. It was about control. Chaos. And a government increasingly resembling a badly managed reality TV set, with global consequences. And like all good plotlines, it came with a twist. A rogue podcast hosted by a former NSA analyst aired an hour-long episode titled, "Tariffs, Tyrants and Traitors," claiming insider sources warned of an imminent cabinet purge. Whether true or not, the damage was done. By week's end, 3 officials were either on leave, reassigned, or off the grid. Newsweek posted a full-page spread. The West Wing wrecking ball, inside Trump's tariff meltdown. Even 60 Minutes scheduled a primetime special titled, "The Dealmaker's Undoing," with footage of Trump walking away from reporters while "Paint It Black" played ominously in the background. And through it all, Trump tweeted, "Fake news is lying again. The economy is booming. People love the tariffs. I've seen the numbers. They're incredible. Probably the best numbers in history." The tweet had 3 typos. And it was posted at 2:37 a.m. America watched, equal parts horrified and entertained. The media machine churned, and like all storms, it didn't pass. It just found new fuel. Because in the Trump era, narrative isn't what happens. Narrative is what people believe happened. And right now, no one could agree on anything, except that it was all getting very interesting. While Washington wrestled with tariffs and loyalty pledges, the rest of America did what it does best: it picked sides and made memes. In red states, Trump's economic gambit was hailed as a power move. Finally, someone standing up to those sneaky globalists, said a farmer in Iowa who hadn't exported a single ear of corn in 5 years, but appreciated the vibe. At a diner in rural Georgia, an elderly man declared, "Don't care if the dollar drops, as long as China loses sleep." When asked if he followed currency trends, he said, "No, but my gut does." Meanwhile, in blue states, the reaction was slightly less enthusiastic. A barista in Portland tweeted, "Trump just declared war on Europe because his croissant was stale." It got 120,000 likes and was later sold as an NFT titled The Croissant Crisis. Polls reflected the divide. Trump's approval among his base actually ticked up, a reminder that policy doesn't need to make sense, just sound strong. But independents? Not so much. In swing states like Pennsylvania and Arizona, approval for the tariffs dropped 12% in 1 week. The term wallet shock began trending. Among Gen Z, it got weird. TikTok flooded with videos where creators roleplayed as the US dollar going to therapy. One clip showed the dollar crying in a fetal position while inflation screamed in the background. Caption: "Me after Trump's latest mood swing." Facebook remained Facebook, half conspiracy, half cooking videos. One top comment: "Trump's playing 12D chess. The tariffs aren't for China. They're for the lizard people." No one was quite sure if it was satire or a campaign slogan. But beneath the chaos, something real was happening. People weren't just divided, they were exhausted. Exhausted by political theater. By sudden economic swings. By waking up every day and wondering, did the president just slap a 25% tariff on toothpaste? And in that exhaustion, momentum shifted. Not entirely. Not loudly. But in whispers at kitchen tables, in texts between friends, in weary sighs over checkout counters. It wasn't rebellion. It was reconsideration. While the public focused on tweets and tariffs, the real drama was unfolding behind closed doors, where loyalty wasn't just expected, it was leveraged. With several cabinet officials either gone, ghosted, or grinding their teeth through passive-aggressive briefings, a familiar pattern re-emerged in Trump's White House: power vacuums invite climbers. Enter Jared Kushner. Fresh from whatever dimension he'd been advising from, Jared returned with charts, soft-spoken authority, and a very specific vibe: the corporate son-in-law who just might take over the empire. He positioned himself as the voice of calm, not because he had the answers, but because he asked the right questions, in a tone that suggested he might own your mortgage. But he wasn't alone. Stephen Miller, pale as ever and now openly quoting Machiavelli at staff lunches, began reasserting influence. He floated a draft titled Fortress America: Strategic Isolation for Strategic Domination. No one knew if it was satire. Trump didn't read it, but reportedly liked the font. Then, quietly but unmistakably, came Ivanka. Once seen as the soft brand of the administration, Ivanka began calling private meetings with mid-level agency heads. Her message? Less ideology, more image. Dad doesn't need noise. He needs narrative, she said, adjusting a color-coded policy binder. And just like that, a triangle of influence emerged. Jared, the fixer. Appealing to Wall Street. Whispering words like stability and foreign investor confidence. Miller, the ideologue. Feeding the base. Dreaming of tariffs on daylight. Ivanka, the rebrand. Glossy, global, careful with commas. And Trump. Trump floated between them, a president king with 3 courtiers, each offering a version of the empire they believed he wanted to rule. One staffer described it best. It's like Succession meets The Apprentice, with a dash of Survivor. Power wasn't just shifting, it was competing. And in a house that thrives on chaos, only one rule applied. Be useful. Or be next. And so, after 8 chapters of political chaos, economic cliffhangers, cabinet mutinies, and trade war theatrics, let's just take a moment to breathe and say, this is all fictional. Imaginary. A big what if. A speculative satire. A totally hypothetical scenario. None of it happened. Probably. Maybe. Possibly. And if it did resemble anything real, that's purely accidental and possibly caused by you watching too much cable news. We don't know what's happening in Trump's second term, or third, depending on which social media platform you believe. We don't know if Jared is sketching economic models on cocktail napkins again. We don't know if Ivanka is planning a rebrand or a rescue mission. We definitely don't know if Stephen Miller keeps a copy of The Art of War under his pillow and murmurs "Fortress Economy" in his sleep. We are merely humble storytellers. Observers. Narrative tourists passing through the carnival of American politics, with popcorn in hand and plausible deniability in our back pocket. Any resemblance to real tweets, rallies, cabinet reshuffles, or plunging currencies is purely coincidental, and maybe a little too close for comfort. Let's be clear. We're not insiders. We don't have sources. And if we did, they definitely don't have clearance. So if someone asks you what this video was about, just smile and say, it's fiction. Satire. Like Game of Thrones, but with more ties and fewer dragons. And remember, in 2025, the scariest thing isn't what's real. It's what might be real, but sounds like a joke. If this wild ride of tariffs, loyalty tests, and imaginary cabinet chaos made you laugh, raise an eyebrow, or question reality just a little, smash that like button. Speech balloon got thoughts? Drop a comment below. We read them all, even the long ones. Bell and hey, if you want more satirical takes on power, politics, and the strange beauty of American headlines, subscribe and hit the bell.